If you were to ask anyone what games they played growing up, 9 out of 10 people would say Fortnite. But seriously, there would probably be a lot of people who have a Tony Hawk game on that list, whether it be Pro Skater or one of the underground games. And why not? The games are fun and entertaining. People far smarter and way more articulate than me have already explained why these games are so great. Personally, I really enjoy all of Rad Rad's videos on the topic. And it shows. These games were selling like hotcakes and the industry was definitely taking notice. And with that, we were starting to see titles that were basically a Tony Hawk game without the Tony Hawk name. Hey, that kind of rhymed. And while there were interesting games coming out that did what I said, such as Simpsons Skateboarding, Disney Skateboarding, and Goofy Extreme Skating, that's not what this video is about. Alright, Goofy Extreme Skateboarding wasn't really a Hawkboy clone, but man, it was something, and I was tricked into thinking it was good because I was a dumb kid. I wonder if backyard skateboarding is even good. But, what we're here for are the Cloney Hawk games that weren't skateboarding. And since I would do anything short of killing someone to get views, I thought I would rank them in a top 5 list. Before we get started, the rules are that they have to be reminiscent or very similar to a Tony Hawk game. There can only be one game per series, and there can only be one game per sport. Because that's how we get a little more variety and how we keep things a little interesting. And you might be wondering, why a top 5? Well, that's because I'm only doing one game per series, and honestly, even getting to 7 games would force me to stretch the definition of what a Tony Hawk clone is. I would have to put shit like Surf's Up, the video game, into the list, and then everything would just go to hell, and not the good kind. So, with all that said, let's get started. Kicking it off at the number 5 spot, we have Kelly Slater's Pro Surfer. It was released in 2002 and published by the Activision O2 label, which is a name you'll hear for 3 of the games on this list. A little backstory. In 2001, Activision saw that the Tony Hawk games were selling gangbusters and decided to create a subdivision dedicated to the extreme sports genre. And why the name O2? Because you get a lot of oxygen while extreme sporting? Oh wait, it has something to do with big air where the oxygen is thinner? Wait, that doesn't make sense either. With good business decisions like that, the label lasted all of 2 or so years before they just released whatever sports games they had under the Big Daddy Activision name again. I should mention that the first game under this sub-label was Matt Hoffman Pro BMX, just to give you an idea of what kind of games were being published. Also, that game isn't going to be on this list for reasons you'll see soon enough. So back to the topic at hand. Surfing is a cool sport. It's all about the thrills and catching the biggest waves and something about Point Break. I get all that, but man, that doesn't really translate into a video game. Maybe it's because I'm not a surfer, but if the only type of level design I get are waves and more waves with different tints, it's going to get boring real quick. And sure, the gameplay is fine, albeit a little difficult to get into at the start. It's not going to stop me from turning the game off after like 30 minutes or so. But that's too negative for number 5, so I'll say that Kelly Slater seems like a cool dude. Oh, and the wipeouts look pretty funny. So now, the number 4 spot is a little interesting because we have 2 series from the same sport that are also kind of similar, so it was kind of hard to pick one over the other. So once again, we're looking at Activision O2. This time, they were doing a BMX game because that's just logical. But unfortunately for them, Acclaim was also working on their own BMX game, Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX. And it's kind of funny because they were supposed to have similar release dates. The problem was that old Matt Hoffman got his game delayed and it ended up coming out 8 or so odd months after Dave Mirra, but hey, they both apparently sold well enough because they both ended up getting sequels. So which one do I prefer? Personally, I like Dave Mirra one more than the first Matt Hoffman, and the same goes for the second game, which of course means that my number 4 pick is Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX 2. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not to say that you shouldn't play the Matt Hoffman games. They're pretty fun and have their own merits, but Dave Mirra just feels better to me. Honestly, the Matt Hoffman games probably sold more though because it was under Activision and the covers actually just look like the Tony Hawk games. And the funniest part is that it's not even the same developer, and I get that, BMX is different than skateboarding. Alright, but now on to Dave Mirra. The trick system is pretty much the same as literally every other game on this list, but it still messed me up anyway since I'm more accustomed to the double tapping of Tony Hawk rather than the input combinations that these games like to employ. The animations are really nice and make the tricks transition smoothly into one another. To be fair, and this goes for most of the games on this list, there isn't much I can say about the gameplay because these are Tony Hawk-like games, which means they're all rooted by a similar gameplay. That means the most I can talk about in terms of the gameplay is what changed and how that feels. Alright, we cool? So the best part about this game, in my opinion, are the levels. They're huge and have a lot of variety. Of course, not on the level of like Project 8 or something that's completely open world. But the reason this is at number 4 is because there are some real annoying flaws. The most notable one is the physics. Sometimes you'll just bail out and it feels like garbage. Then par for the course of buggy games, there are clipping issues and the collision detection is a little spotty. Past all that, the game is kinda hard. Just moving around can feel kinda weird and it's hard to control in general, which honestly makes sense because these are the same people that made Thrasher Skate and Destroy. Wait, I kinda just want a second Thrasher instead. We're at the number 3 spot, and hey, it's another Activision O2 game, Shawn Palmer Pro Snowboarding. It's funny, when I started this list, I thought there would be way more snowboarding games on here, but as I started to put these games under scrutiny, none of them really emulated the Tony Hawk style, and if anything, it'll be more of a look at the legacy and impact of SSX, which doesn't sound too bad of an idea actually. Anyway, the reason for this is because of the nature of snowboarding and how it's a one-direction affair. Mountains go down, and it's kind of hard to climb back up, especially on a board. That's why something like SSX decided to make it more of a racing affair where you get a lot of speed and hit some big airs. So what about the Shawn Palmer game? Well, the tricks are more Tony Hawk-esque instead of the unique trick system of its snowboarding equals. And the gameplay loop is similar to the downhill levels in older Tony Hawk games, which is kind of why I like it. It was something new to the snowboarding scene in my opinion, and while this allows for interesting level structures that attempt to balance objective-based gaming and always going downhill, it tends to make things frustrating. For example, if you have a mission to hit a certain amount of signs, you have to keep an eye out for them and make sure you hit them. And if you miss them, fuck you. Might as well run that shit back, cause you sure as hell can't turn around. Sure, there are ways to loop back around such as getting to the end of the level or using one of the ski lifts which you can still miss. There's still a time limit that you have to complete things in, and having to get to a reset point can be time consuming. Now, with that out of the way, can someone tell me who Shawn Palmer is? When I was younger, I thought he was just Shaun White. That was a stupid kid. Alright, for the number 2 spot, you're gonna have to stay with me here. Surfing video games have some boring levels that have to be carried by the gameplay, but there has to be a water sport game with the Tony Hawk gameplay formula that doesn't just have water. And there is one, and it's a wakeboarding game, which is funny because at first glance, wakeboarding is way more limited than surfing because of the whole being dragged by a boat thing, and if you let go of the rope, you'll be lost at sea, but here we are. That's right, number 2 goes to Wakeboarding Unleashed featuring Sean Murray, which brings up 2 questions. 1. Who is Sean Murray? And 2. Why isn't it just named Sean Murray's Pro Wakeboarding? This was, after all, also published under the Activision O2 label, so I'm not entirely sure why this name was picked. Also, this is the last Activision O2 game on the list, so you don't have to worry about Lance Armstrong Pro Cycling being the number 1 spot or something like that. I'll be straight though. This is the only one on the list that I haven't played when I was younger. The only wakeboarding game I ever played was some PS1 game that was kinda trash, which might have been why my pre-ranking had this game on the 4th spot. But man, this game really is fun. Like, I was surprised. First of all, the levels are pretty interesting. Since it's more of a track than an open area, you get to see all the gaps and secrets since they're all out in the open. I personally enjoyed the Boneyard level. And the gameplay is pretty up to snuff too. Honestly, this game feels the most similar to Tony Hawk's than any other game on this list, in more ways than just the controls. Initially, you would think that this game would feel hindered because of being chained by a boat, but nope, you get a button dedicated to letting go of the rope and calling it back. Not sure how that works, but hey, it's pretty great. You get to start deciding when to actually let go, when it's to get a sick gap or something. Plus, they utilize the concept of wave riding in the co-op mode, as in the second player gets to actually drive the boat, and that gives the player straight up full control of how they want to navigate. Though, of course, you can't just turn around, because that's not how any of this works. Like I said before, this game was more fun than I expected, and I wish there was a sequel or something, but let's be honest, if the number 1 spot didn't get a sequel, then this one wouldn't either. But before I get into the number 1 spot, I want to shout out some honorable and dishonorable mentions. I'll just list them because I don't want to take up too much time talking about these titles. The honorable mentions are going to the snowboarding games that ended up doing their own thing, being different enough where I couldn't in good conscience put them on the list. The main ones being AMP 3, which is underrated immensely, I feel. SSX Tricky and Cool Borders 2 or 3 or 4. As for the dishonorable mentions, these two were games that particularly stuck out to me as being close enough to Tony Hawk's games, but just were, dishonorable, I guess. These two are BMX XXX and Razor Freestyle Scooter, though I have to give Razor Freestyle Scooter some credit. That kid is looking mighty radical if I do say so myself. Alright, it's time for the number 1 spot, which some people might have already guessed, Aggressive Inline. This was the game that was supposed to stick around and be the new Tony Hawk, probably. Unfortunately, the game faded into obscurity, kind of like how rollerblades faded into obscurity in real life. But this game is amazing, and introduced some ideas that ended up being used in other games, even Tony Hawk games. The most obvious one is putting it into time sessions when doing a level as a response to the game having larger levels. And who knows if this influenced later games, but it was definitely ahead of its time. Where you were rushing to accomplish as many objectives as you can before time ran out, you can now just chill out and just dick around as you saw fit while occasionally getting some objectives done. It was chill, and yes, I do know what free play is, don't yell at me. To be fair though, there was a failstate called the juice meter, similar to that groove thing in wakeboarding, where if you kept bailing out and not doing tricks, you would run out of juice and have to stop. This was trivial though, since it's really hard to run out, trust me. Something else that was in the game that was ahead of its time was the stats system. It sought to emulate real life in a way, and you were able to increase your stats by doing the associated moves. Increase your grind skill by grinding, increase your manual skill by doing, you guessed it, manuals. It goes on, and it honestly feels good to be rewarded for doing something over and over by getting better at it. This is something that shows up later in things such as Tony Hawk's Underground, and on top of all this, the gameplay was smooth and fluid since the devs opted for a simpler trick system. This is from the same people that did the Dave Mirra games, and you could tell they learned a lot and reached their peak with this game. Then they made BMX XXX, and then they died. So there you have it, my list on the top 5 non-skateboarding Tony Hawk's games. What did you think of the list? Was it garbage? Was there something that I left out? Please let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear them. But for now, have a good day, and I'll see you later.